Well, hello there, it's Brian. I really should come up with a better intro. So, now that I've wrapped up my transfer from the dealership to Best Buy, I've wanted to touch up the everyday life of the workplace, the job role, and any other details that I can recall. I did work there for about 5 years, so there's a few stories I've picked up on. So, here it goes. As you might have heard from one of my previous podcasts, when I was hired, I was stationed at the cellular or mobile department, whichever name you'd like to call it. And speaking about the departments, when I first started the job, I found it strange that the store had sections divided throughout the place, and each one had its own specialized associates. After all, back at Radio Shack you were expected to have knowledge of all products, including smaller gadgets such as resistors. And I got a little overconfident that most of my placement was going to be at the mobile department. And if that wasn't enough confidence, I kept thinking that this was going to be an easy job, since my attention was going to be setting up contracts and selling mobile devices, though at least I assumed that my job role was going to be limited. For the first few weeks I was focused on learning the new software tool used to activate phones. I guess over the time, from lack of practice, I forgot to work with these kinds of activation programs, but then again it worked just a tad different compared to Radio Shack's. And this program was called Beast. I can't remember what the acronym represented, but it was definitely a beast of a headache to work with. The program would glitch, forcing you to close the entire process and start all over. There were just so many unnecessary options. But I remembered one thing that made it a pain, and that was the fact that the cell phone wouldn't activate until the very last page. Think about the program as a series of web pages. Fill one page out and click continue on to the next one. At the last page, you would then click on the Activate button, which would put together all the details you entered. But if the stupid program ran into an error while it tried to compile all the previous pages, then it was back to square one. Almost like a race where you've reached the finish line and then thrown back at the start. Now imagine what it is when you're dealing with a rude customer. In that situation, I would not even bring anything up. If the system messed up, then I'll simply start over without mentioning the hiccup. Phone activation seemed to be the biggest hassle for not only the customers but also the associates. For the most part, most customers didn't want to deal with the time it took up, and for the associates, they felt as if it was counterproductive for them. So going back as far as each member having their own department, it was okay for anyone to rush over to assist if one place was needing backup. So yes, I've walked over to the computer department or home theater to give those places a hand. Of course, knowing computers, I was more comfortable helping out there than home theater. Some places I tried to avoid were areas such as car stereos and home appliances, where washers and refrigerators were present. And with so many different areas, I was clueless on the fields. Thus, this is where I became more grateful for having specialized associates. Now I know there's always a learning experience with all things, but remember that my main focus was dealing with cell phones and contracts. Having specialized techs at other departments is what allowed me to get into all the nitty-gritty details, without having the mental load of changing gears. One of the biggest gripes: if the mobile department was overrun by customers, other departments would turn a blind eye if we needed assistance. Like I mentioned earlier, phone activation took time, and associates didn't want to get tied up no longer than what inconvenienced them. For one, we all had numbers to reach, but also for two, many associates were focused on revenue sold. It depends on what you could sell, but generally home theater sold the most, with some salesmen averaging $5,000 to $10,000 per day, followed by the computer department, and last there was mobile, as it was dramatically much less. Also, before I forget to mention this, home theater also took on the job of selling appliances. Just imagine selling $10,000 worth of TVs, surround systems, and appliances in one day by one associate. And I'm assuming even more during the holidays. Now, this is just for the site where my store was located. I'm sure other places had much higher or lower revenue per day. But boy, was I frustrated when help was needed and most of the other employees would just ignore my team and I. It was a sense of unfairness, and over time I would get discouraged to help out other departments. Though other days, even if I wasn't asked to help, I would still hover over for some assistance, as it was a way to change things up if I got tired of talking about phones. Though I wasn't a big fan of home theater, as I'm not much of a movie watcher, nor did I care for appliances, even if they're considered a need. Even so, one thing that was really impressive were the high-end TVs, especially when showcasing higher-end visuals, were just jaw-dropping amazing. And for computers, I may have to go over that department another time. I wonder if I could explain and teach the basics of the workings for computers in a simplistic way. It might even help me freshen my memory on the mechanics and the use of consumer products. And I'd like to touch up on how metrics worked for the retail store. The way each associate was graded on their performance. Oh right, I forgot to go over Geek Squad, and I'll definitely need to cover that topic another time. But for now, I think I've kept the talk long enough, and I'd definitely be glad to work on another podcast. But anyways, thank you all.